Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today we're going to hand you this curated stack of recent info, right? It's like your shortcut to understanding what's really going on out there, without getting bogged down in endless details. We're diving into three key areas, the things you really need to know about. First, we've got this fresh economic snapshot, and it's painting a somewhat confusing picture. Then there's this political scandal, and it has some pretty big ramifications. And lastly, some surprising developments in the world of elections and some of the key political figures out there. Our goal here is to extract the really crucial insights for you, understand their potential impact, and just keep it all clear and concise.
Exactly. We've done all the heavy lifting for you, right? Sorting through all that data and the headlines, all that. We're looking for those underlying signals, and more importantly, trying to figure out why any of this should even matter to you.
Okay, so let's jump right into it, huh? This economic review from around March 21st, 2025, it really feels like we're getting these mixed messages, February retail sales, they edged up, right? 0.2%. But that was quite a bit below what everyone was expecting, like 0.6%.
Yeah.
And then to top it all off, January's figures got revised down to a pretty significant Mundigo 1.2%. I don't know about you, but it's enough to make me scratch my head.
Yeah, it does. But what's really interesting to think about here, right, is that even with that slower February, overall retail sales, they're still up by 3.1% compared to this time last year. And that's actually a faster pace than the latest inflation numbers, which were at 2.8% as measured by the CPI, the Consumer Price Index.
Right.
So while the month-to-month growth, was a little bit sluggish, the year-over-year picture, it suggests that consumers, at least in general, they might still have some purchasing power.
Yeah, that's a key point about the real purchasing power. And it gets even more nuanced when you look at what's called the retail sales control group.
Okay.
This is like a specific subset of that data.
Gotcha.
It excludes things like car purchases and gas, but things that can change quite a bit each month. So looking at the control group gives us a clearer picture of underlying consumer demand for other goods. That figure, it actually jumped, right, by a solid 1% in February. That was way stronger than the 0.2% that was expected. So it's almost like two totally different parts of the economy are telling two different stories.
Yeah.
If the control group is so strong, then what do you think explains that weaker headline number?
Yeah.
Could it be like a specific sector that's really struggling out there?
Yeah, that's a really crucial question. And this difference, it highlights how consumer behavior, it's not like one big uniform thing. The pullback we're seeing in things like motor vehicles, maybe that's because of higher interest rates, right? Making it more expensive to finance those purchases. Or maybe that pent-up demand from earlier, it's been satisfied. The strength we're seeing in that control group, though, it reflects spending on a whole bunch of different goods, so it suggests that fundamental consumer appetite, it isn't necessarily going down across the board. It really could be pointing to a more segmented economic picture out there, where some areas are holding up better than others.
Okay, now let's switch gears here a little bit.
Sure.
Let's look at the housing market.
Yeah.
We saw a pretty big rebound in housing starts in February, a jump of 11.2%.
Wow.
That brings the annualized rate to 1.501 million.
Okay.
That comfortably beat expectations, which were only around 1.385 million.
So that surge, that's definitely something that catches your eye. What's really interesting about it is that it was driven by increases in both single-family and multifamily housing starts, So both types of housing are contributing to that growth.
Okay.
However, if we kind of zoom out a bit, right? Even with that really strong February, overall housing starts are still down by 2.9% compared to a year ago. So you have this positive short-term trend, but the longer-term picture, it suggests that there's still some moderation happening in the construction sector.
I see. And we also saw that building permits, which can be a good indicator of future construction, they dipped a little bit. By 1.2%. But they did still narrowly beat expectations. Feels like the housing market's just trying to decide its next move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. And, the report, it does mention a possible factor here, something that could be influencing those numbers. January's unusually cold weather, that could have put a temporary halt to some construction projects. So that would make February's rebound look even more significant, right, as those projects get back on track.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on to the Federal Reserve now. They decided to keep the main policy interest rate steady
Right.
in that 4.25% to 4.50% range, which wasn't a huge surprise, but, they released a statement. And Chairman Powell, he spoke afterwards, and it gave us some insight into their thinking. What stood out to you from their assessment of the economy?
Well, they said that, quote, economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace and labor market conditions remain solid.
Okay.
Which, on the surface, that sounds pretty positive, right?
Right, yeah.
But the really important part is that they still believe inflation remains somewhat elevated. That's still their biggest concern. And, if we consider Powell's press conference, I think the overall tone was more what we call hawkish, right?
Okay.
So even though they didn't raise rates this time, it felt like they're getting a little less tolerant of inflation. Maybe their target for inflation is creeping up a bit, and their outlook for economic growth, maybe that's become a little more subdued, right?
Right, I see.
It signals that they're still laser focused on bringing inflation down, even if that means, potentially accepting slower economic growth to get there.
So how did the markets react to all this economic news, all these different things going on?
Yeah.
It seems like, despite those underlying concerns,
Yeah.
For the week ending March 21st, 2025, we actually saw positive returns across all those major U.S. stock indices. The Dow Jones, it actually led the way with a gain of 1.21%.
That's right. And it wasn't just those big established companies either.
Right.
Mid-cap and small-cap stocks, they also performed well during that week. And then if you look at developed international equities, those continue to have these really impressive gains for the year so far. And even the fixed income market saw some positive movement, Interest rates dipped just a bit, probably because of those consumer spending concerns that we were talking about earlier. It seems like the market's reacting in this kind of nuanced way, right? They're acknowledging that growth might slow down, but they're still finding opportunities out there.
So bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway for us from this whole economic snapshot?
I think the analyst perspective, that really gets to the heart of it, that somewhat disappointing retail sales data, it's creating some worries about how fast the economy will grow in the future, this concern about consumer spending maybe weakening. That could actually become a bigger story than the Fed's decision to just hold rates steady. It really sets the stage for maybe a more cautious outlook on the economy over the next few months.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now.
Okay.
Let's move over to the political arena. We've got to dive into this teapot signal scandal.
Oh, right.
This thing involving the Trump administration. And it's as of March 26, 2025. This one's really grabbed people's attention. And at its core, it seems to be about this really significant lapse in judgment.
Yeah, I think what's so striking is the apparent casualness, the way this really sensitive information was handled. We're talking about details about an upcoming military attack, and they were accidentally shared with the editor of The Atlantic using the Signal messaging app. That could have some huge consequences for national security and, for international trust in the U.S.
Absolutely. And the immediate aftermath of this whole thing, it's been like watching a textbook example of a blame game, right? At first it seemed like NSA Mike Walty was taking the brunt of the criticism, supposedly because he accidentally added Jeffrey Goldberg to a group chat. But the report we looked at, it emphasizes that the real issue isn't about who got added. It's the fact that these really important, really sensitive discussions, they were happening on an app that wasn't secure.
Right.
It sounds like multiple officials, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he was in the hot seat too. Maybe they were all operating outside of the proper security protocol.
Yeah. And Walt's, his response was really interesting. It was like this non-apology. He said he takes some responsibility, but then he immediately goes on the attack, calling Goldberg scum. It's a strange way to address such a serious security issue. And what's even more interesting is there are these reports of a lot of anger among Republicans behind the scenes. Apparently, a lot of them already had doubts about Waltz. And now people are comparing this to Mike Flynn's dismissal back in the day, suggesting that maybe Waltz's position in the administration, it might be shaky.
Yeah, and these security concerns about using Signal, they're really raising red flags. Representative Don Bacon, he's a Republican, right, with a background in intelligence. He said pretty confidently that Russia and China, they're actively listening in on communications happening on personal cell phones.
Yeah, that warning from Rep. Bacon, it's pretty stark, you know? It underscores the inherent risks of using these communication channels that haven't been approved by the government for sensitive discussions. And then we have this anonymous IT expert, right? They've got tons of experience in federal law enforcement. They pointed out that Signal, it's not FedRAMPed. That means it hasn't gone through this really rigorous security check that's required for anything the federal government uses, especially when they're handling really sensitive information.
Right.
And this directly contradicts something that CIA Director John Ratcliffe apparently claimed. So this raises some serious questions about how well they understand and apply those security protocols, even at the highest levels of government.
And this IT expert, they also emphasized that even if people were using their personal phones, official government devices, they have way better security, way harder to hack.
Exactly.
And then there's that report that Signal itself might have been hacked by Russia.
Right.
Which just adds another layer of risk to using it for sensitive communications.
Yeah, it's not just a theoretical weakness anymore.
Right.
There's actual reporting that says, hey, maybe this has already happened. But then you have this more cynical take, the idea that maybe they use Signal on purpose to avoid creating official records of these conversations, to avoid oversight.
Which, if that's true, opens up a whole new set of problems.
Oh, right.
About transparency and accountability in the administration. And we know that Congress has been holding hearings. They're trying to do damage control. And the administration seemed to be saying, look, no classified information was actually shared.
But that defense, no classified information, it creates this catch-22.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't classified, then the Atlantic's editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, he could probably release those text messages, right?
Right.
But if the administration tries to stop him, or maybe even tries to sue him, well, then they'd basically be admitting that the information was classified, right? And that would contradict everything they've said publicly. And it could even lead to accusations of perjury, right, against those who testified under oath.
And the report really emphasizes, how likely it is that details about an upcoming military strike, that would be automatically classified right from the start. So if Goldberg, if he goes ahead and releases the info because the administration's saying it's not classified, and then it turns out there are classified details in there, well, the administration is going to look really bad.
Yeah.
They not only misled the public, but they also, they potentially let classified information get out there just to try to manage this scandal.
It's a mess with some serious legal and political consequences. And as you might expect, those comparisons to Hillary Clinton's emails, those have started popping up again, especially in, right-leaning media.
Right, her emails. But, the report does a good job of explaining the key differences between these two situations. In Clinton's case, they did all these investigations, right? And they didn't find any evidence that anyone unauthorized got into her private server. And only a tiny fraction of those emails, they were actually deemed classified. And a lot of times they were classified after the fact, or they were about stuff that was already public knowledge, like news reports about drone strikes and things like that.
Right.
This Signal thing, though, it's different. We're talking about a real-time conversation, right? About a military operation that's about to happen. And it's all happening on this insecure app, something anyone can download. It's a much more immediate risk and potentially way more serious.
Yeah. The consequences for international relations could be huge.
Absolutely.
The report asked this really important question, how can any country share anything sensitive, anything important with the U.S. right now?
Yeah.
This whole thing, it makes the U.S. look careless. They don't care about intelligence security, even at the highest levels of government. And that destroys the trust that's so important for sharing intelligence and cooperating on defense. It really increases instability around the world.
And while we don't know yet what will happen to the individuals involved, domestically, there's no doubt that this scandal shines a really bad light on how sensitive information is being handled at the very top of the administration.
Absolutely. Okay, so shifting gears again.
Yeah.
There's another major political development we need to talk about. It's this executive order from President Trump focused on, quote, election integrity, dated March 26, 2025.
Okay, so this order, it seems to be trying to address a lot of those concerns that Republicans have had for a long time about how secure our elections are. But it sounds like it's running into some roadblocks when it comes to actually putting it into practice, and even questions about whether it's legal.
What's really interesting here is is just how much this executive order tries to do. It wants to require proof of citizenship for anyone registering to vote, stop the counting of any ballots that come in after Election Day, ban non-citizens from working as poll workers, make the federal government oversee election security, and give the feds the main role in prosecuting election fraud. But as the report accurately points out, the U.S. Constitution pretty much gives states the power to run their own elections.
So a lot of what this executive order says, it's more like a symbolic gesture
Yeah.
than something that can really be enforced.
Exactly. Even that part about proof of citizenship, which has gotten a lot of attention, it mainly tells the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, to change the federal voter registration form. But the EAC, it's designed to be independent and bipartisan, so it's not clear if they'll even go along with that. And even if the federal form changes, states have their own forms and processes for registering voters, so it wouldn't really matter what the federal form says.
And, saying they might withhold federal funding to force states to comply, that seems like it would just lead to a bunch of lawsuits.
For sure. That would probably be seen as an overreach in federal power, totally unconstitutional. And it would be illegal to hold back those funds that Congress has already approved. The report calls this order performative, and I think that's a good way to put it. It's probably meant to reassure a part of the Republican base, make them feel like something's being done about election security, even though, the order might not have any real legal standing or any way to actually make it happen.
All right, well, let's look at some actual election results now. Specifically, this Democratic upset in the Pennsylvania special election for State Senate District 36. Also, as of March 26, this was a real shocker.
It really was. This district, it leans Republican, by a lot, like 15 points, according to the Partisan Voter Index. Trump won there by a similar margin back in 2024, and it's been held by Republicans for over 40 years. So for Democrat James Malone to win here, that's a pretty big deal.
And it wasn't even close. He won by over 500 votes. And for a special election, the turnout was surprisingly high. They even quoted a local voter in the report who said that the Republicans didn't really campaign much before the election. Maybe they thought their candidate was a shoo-in, or maybe there wasn't much enthusiasm.
Yeah, that kind of local perspective is really valuable. And it wasn't just this one race either. Democrats also won the special election for House District 35, although that district leans more Democratic anyway, and their win there was by a bigger margin. But what's interesting is that in both of these races, the Democrats got way more votes than anyone expected, like about 14.5 percentage points more. And in districts that usually vote Republican, that kind of swing, you've got to pay attention to that.
That is a huge difference. The report suggests that maybe this is an early sign of people turning against Trump, a backlash.
Yeah.
Especially because Malone, his campaign even had this anti-Elon Musk theme, which could really resonate with certain voters.
Definitely something to watch. The Wisconsin Supreme Court election that's coming up and the special elections in Florida, those will be key to see if this trend keeps going or if those Pennsylvania results were just a fluke. Even Governor DeSantis, he made a surprising comment recently saying that Republicans might not do as well as expected in Florida. So maybe the GOP is sensing that things are changing politically.
Okay, let's move on to another area of political activity now.
Yeah.
A lawsuit filed by some staff and students at Columbia University against Trump administration policies. This is also from March 26.
Okay.
This lawsuit, it makes some pretty serious claims saying that constitutional rights are being violated.
This lawsuit's alleging violations of the First and Fifth Amendments, specifically when it comes to the administration's policies on deportation. They say these policies are being used to target students and faculty, those who aren't U.S. citizens, if they've criticized Israel or said they support the Palestinians. The lawsuit claims that this is unconstitutional because it's based on what people are saying, their political views. And it says that these actions are creating a climate of fear that's stopping people from speaking freely and having academic freedom.
Yeah, and the lawsuit gives specific examples. Like they talk about the alleged unlawful seizure of someone named Mahmoud Khalil. And it mentions reports that the administration is keeping these lists of students who have been sent to universities as a way to, keep tabs on them and maybe target those who have pro-Palestinian views. It sounds like they're saying the administration is going around the established legal process when they decide that certain speech, certain things that people say should be grounds for kicking them out of the country.
And there are reports of people being scared to speak out, and self-censorship among members of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors.
Right.
And it's directly because of these policies and because people feel like they're being targeted for their political views. The people who filed this lawsuit, they're asking for a legal order to block those executive orders and stop them from being enforced. It's interesting that Columbia University itself, they're not part of the lawsuit. Probably because they want to protect all that federal funding they get, right? But the legal challenge is still going ahead without them.
Lastly, let's talk about the news that Monmouth University, they're shutting down their polling operation. Officially, they said it was because the costs were too high and the benefits weren't worth it. They said, fewer students are participating and they're not getting good PR from it anymore. But the report we looked at, it suggests that there might be more to it than that.
What's interesting is the idea that maybe pressure from the Trump administration played a role. We know that President Trump, he's been very public about criticizing pollsters, even attacking them sometimes, especially if their polls show him doing badly. Sometimes he's sued them or even, hinted that their funding might be in danger.
Right.
So for a university polling operation like Monmouth, which might already be struggling financially, that kind of pressure combined with the fact that their polls were probably going to show Trump in a bad light anyway, that could have been a big reason for them to shut down. It really makes you wonder if this is having a chilling effect on independent polling, making people afraid to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, so for our last topic today, let's take a look at Representative Jasmine Crockett and the way she seems to be using these tactics that we usually associate with, the right wing, especially people like Donald Trump. The report starts by talking about Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's attack on Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it calls this obnoxious jerkiness. And it asks a really good question, can a politician on the left really succeed by using that same kind of aggressive personal style of attack that we see so much on the right?
Right.
The report doesn't seem to think so.
Right.
They say it's because the two major parties, they have totally different cultures, different voters. What works for one side might not work for the other. They mention a few examples of people on the left who tried to do this and didn't become really popular or get very far politically, like Kanye West, Mayor Eric Adams, Senator John Fetterman, people like that.
Yeah.
And now they're looking at Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas as like a newer example of this, performative politics.
Her focus recently has been very critical of Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Right.
Which, that's normal political stuff, considering their different views. But the way she's going about it, it's caused a lot of controversy. She's been mocking Governor Abbott's disability, calling him Governor Hot Wheels over and over.
Yeah.
Which, for those who don't know, Hot Wheels is, it's a toy car brand.
Right. And in this context, it's a really insensitive way to make fun of the fact that he uses a wheelchair. The report really condemns this.
Yeah.
Calling it beyond the pale and saying it's just like those personal attacks and mockery that we saw from Trump in the past. Crockett hasn't apologized, and her excuse for saying it wasn't very convincing. This is a clear example of a politician just resorting to insults instead of talking about actual policy.
Yeah. And even though Representative Crockett's district is very safe for Democrats, so she's probably not going to lose her seat over this, the report argues that this kind of behavior, it's not going to help her get ahead politically, especially in a state like Texas, where there are voters from all different backgrounds, and they don't think she's going to become a big star on the left-wing media like Marjorie Taylor Greene has on the right. They say that people like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are a better example of how to do left-wing politics effectively and ethically.
So to wrap up this whole deep dive, we've really covered a lot. We've seen this complicated economic picture with all its mixed signals. We dug into a big political scandal that raises some really serious questions about national security and trust. And we looked at some important changes in election results and how politicians are changing their tactics.
Right.
It's clear that all these different things, they're all connected. And they give us this, this fascinating but sometimes unsettling look at what's going on in the world right now.
What's really striking is how all these different threads we've talked about, right? The economic uncertainty that's still out there, that erosion of trust that's highlighted by the Signal scandal, the fight between federal and state power that we saw in the election integrity debate and the Columbia University lawsuit, and the way political discourse is changing,
Yeah.
All of that contributes to this feeling that our society is in a state of tension and that it's going through this really big transformation.
That's a great point. And it makes me think about something. That surprise Democratic win in that Pennsylvania State Senate district, that was historically Republican, right? And then you have that lawsuit from Columbia University. Those staff members challenging federal policies. What does that tell us about how politics might be shifting at the local level? And can institutions really push back against what the federal government is doing? These are questions worth thinking about as we watch all these changes happening around us. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today. Keep exploring these topics and see what other connections and implications you can find.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next time.